Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the leader of Hamas and architect of the October 7th attacks is killed by Israel's military. The ramifications for the war in Gaza.
How abortion measures on the ballot in the critical swing states of Nevada and Arizona could tip the balance in the presidential race.
I don't necessarily support all abortion. I feel like there are exceptions, though, that need to be available, especially for people like me who have unexpected complications in pregnancy.
And we examine the stark differences between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's promises and policies on climate change.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
a law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
On an American Cruise Line's journey along the legendary Mississippi River, travelers explore Civil War battlefields and historic riverside towns. Aboard our fleet of American riverboats, you can experience local culture and cuisine and discover the music and history of the mighty Mississippi. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. One of the world's most hunted men is dead. Hamas military leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by Israeli troops yesterday in southern Gaza. The news of his killing came today, and after DNA testing, Israel confirmed the mastermind of the October 7th attacks on Israel was indeed dead.
Those terror attacks just over a year ago killed more than 1,200 Israelis, the deadliest single day for Jews since the Holocaust. The war Sinwar launched led to a brutal military response by Israel to destroy Hamas, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, mostly women and children. Nick Schifrin is here now with the latest. Nick?
Amna, for months, the U.S. and Israel have dedicated vast resources to try and find Sinwar, who they believed was hiding in tunnels. But in the end, Sinwar died posing as a regular fighter, not in a tunnel, not surrounded by hostages, not wearing a suicide vest. And the Israeli soldiers who killed him had no idea he was there. And a warning, this story contains disturbing images. The death of one of the world's most wanted men was, in the end, by chance. Yesterday, soldiers from tank and infantry training units operating in Rafah got in a firefight. The Israeli military released this drone video as it searched a house. They saw an unidentified fighter still alive. And they fired again. That's when they entered the house and realized they recognized him and found documents and money. They took his body and confirmed with DNA tests it was Yahya Sinwar, the military and political leader of Hamas and the architect of the October 7th terrorist attack. Israel's top general Herzi Halevi visited the area and credited Israel's plan to push through Rafah despite international resistance.
We conducted many special operations in this war where we had excellent information and pinpoint accuracy. Here, we didn't have that. And yet the response was very, very strong.
Today is a religious holiday in Israel and across the country. They celebrated Sinwar's death. But Israelis and senior U.S. officials say their immediate concern is the 100 remaining hostages, believed to be held in Gaza by mid-level Hamas leadership in tunnels. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Today, evil has suffered a heavy blow, but the task before us is not yet complete. To the dear families of the abductees, I say, this is an important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until the return home of all your loved ones, who are our loved ones.
But Israeli and American officials also hope Sinwar's death is the beginning of the end of the war. Pockets of Hamas fighters still attack and release videos showing targeting of Israeli tanks. Today, Netanyahu made them an offer.
Whoever lays down his weapon and returns our hostages, we will allow him to go out and live. The return of our hostages is an opportunity to achieve all our goals, and it brings the end of the war closer.
The U.S. hopes the end of the war, including a hostage release, can launch reconstruction and larger diplomatic efforts to provide Gaza new leadership. President Biden this afternoon in Berlin.
Now's the time to move on. Move toward a ceasefire in Gaza. Make sure that we move in the direction that we're going to be in a position to make things better for the whole world. It's time for this war to end and bring these hostages home.
Sinwar grew up in Khan Yunis and helped found Hamas as its chief enforcer. In 1998, Israel arrested him, and over 23 years in detention, he learned Hebrew, studied Israeli society, and even received life-saving surgery in an Israeli hospital. In 2011, in exchange for a single Israeli soldier, Israel released Sinwar and more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. He was welcomed back to Gaza, a hero. He became Hamas's Gaza chief in 2017, a disciplined and dictatorial leader. He always described himself as a soldier who will die amongst his fighters. But he also convinced Israel he wanted a long-term status quo. That was a bluff. He helped design the deadliest attack in Israeli history to be so violent, so brutal, and involve so many hostages, it would help ignite regional war. The fighting has spread to Lebanon and between Israel and Iran. He believed Palestinian and Israeli deaths were a necessary tool and reignited the Palestinian cause. But the war he helped launch has destroyed Gaza and the lives of its people. He also defined victory as his and the group's survival. And today, Jeff, Sinwar and nearly all of Hamas's leadership is dead.
Nick, we know that the U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken is heading to the region. What's his goal for this trip?
Try and make progress on hostages and the day after. On hostages, he hopes that new leadership in Hamas would be willing to make a deal that Sinwar is not, but it's not clear Hamas will have new leadership in time to even make that decision. And on the day after, the U.S. has been negotiating with Arab partners to take over security in Gaza as a transition to Palestinian Authority governance. But there's no agreement between Arab partners or with Benjamin Netanyahu. And so the U.S. does see this as an opportunity, but knows it'll be difficult to translate it into diplomatic and political progress.
Nick Schifrin, our thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
For perspective on the killing of Hamas's leader and what lies ahead, we get two perspectives. Retired Major General Yaakov Ayish retired in 2016 after a 36-year career in the Israel Defense Forces. He's now at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, a nonprofit that advocates for closer U.S.-Israeli relations. And Hussein Ibish is a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, which advocates for closer relations between the U.S. and countries in the Persian Gulf. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Hussein, I'll begin with you. Yeah. And just start with the reaction to Yahya Sinwar's death among Palestinians. Yeah. How is that news resonating on the ground, and does this mean the end of Hamas?
It certainly doesn't mean the end of Hamas. It doesn't even mean the end of the insurrection that has been taking place in Gaza since the end of the Rafah campaign, which is, I believe, the war that Hamas actually wanted to fight. Palestinians having a mixed reaction here. There's a lot of anger against Israel. I think there's a lot of sympathy for Hamas in the West Bank, where people are more removed from the consequences of the October 7 blowback and Israel's savage war vengeance in Gaza, which has taken at least 42,000, probably many, many more lives, and displaced virtually everyone in Gaza, produced endemic hunger and all kinds of suffering. In Gaza, interestingly, there's a significant group of people who appear to be delighted. with his passing because they blame him rightly for having volunteered the entire population for martyrdom.
General Aish, let me bring you in here because we heard earlier Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Sinwar's death is the beginning of the end, but he also said that Israel will not stop this war in Gaza. What's your reaction to that? Should he take this moment to end military operations there?
I think we should look at the broad picture. The strategic goal of Israel after the attack that have happened by Hamas on October 7th was very simple: to bring back the hostages and to restore security, to allow the residents of the south back to their villages. And in order to do that, one of the major important terms was to eliminate the threat of Hamas. And for that, you have to eliminate the 24 battalions of Hamas. For that, you have to eliminate Hamas infrastructure. For that, you have to eliminate Hamas military leadership. We have no interest in Gaza otherwise whatsoever.
Hussein, let me ask you about Hamas moving forward from here.
Yeah.
What does Sinwar's death mean? Who steps up for him? Could it be a more moderate voice?
Possible.
And also, does this change Iran's support?
No, I don't think it'll do anything to Iran's relationship with Hamas, which is a marriage of convenience. Hamas doesn't fit well in the Iranian alliance. Now, as for who's next, there is a slight chance that the hotel guys, as he used to call the former political leaders mainly in Qatar and Turkey, could try to get control back. But it's more likely that leadership will fall to either an armed person in Gaza or perhaps even a diverse set of armed leaders. The insurgency that's developed after the Rafah campaign was basically completed and the formal organized battalions of Hamas were crushed, doesn't require extensive command and control. It doesn't require a single charismatic leader.
General Aish, what about the hostages you mentioned as one of the main goals of this war, right? I mean, previously they were supposed to be brought home as the result of some kind of ceasefire. Negotiations never materialized to get that across the finish line. How do you see the hostages coming home at this point?
Well, we can look at the last 12 months with Sinwar as a leader, definitely. He was a tough negotiator. And we couldn't really succeed to bring back the hostages unless it was a rescue operation, as we have seen every now and then. But basically, 101 hostages are still at the other side. And for that, the Israeli Prime Minister came out today after Sinwar was eliminated, calling to those who are holding the hostages there to send them back to Israel, and then they'll be given a free pass either outside of Gaza or elsewhere. So the option is there. I'd like to go back for a second to the future leadership of Hamas. I think it's a very important point. Definitely Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah have suffered in the last, I would say, 2 months, a severe blow when it comes to leadership. Hamas have lost today, practically speaking, all of his leadership. And now we are seeing how whatever the Iranians were preparing to surprise Israel, to attack Israel, that ring of fire that will surround Israel, how suddenly it cracks. So I think the future leader of Hamas is a very important element here. At least the voices that I hear is that Hamas already decided that Khaled Mash'al, who have more, I would say, orientation towards Qatar, he's going to be the temporary leader. And I'm not sure that the Iranians are going to enjoy that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The only question is, if Mishal is the obvious person to take over as the titular leader now. I'm just doubtful that people on the ground are going to be listening to him. If he says release hostages in a deal, they might. But if he tries to get them to give up on the insurgency that's taking place, I think that's a bigger ask. The gunmen on the ground control Hamas, and I'm not sure power, real power on the ground, goes back to what Sinwar called the hotel guys in Qatar, even if they become, again, the titular leaders.
I'd love to get both of your takes on this bigger picture issue if we pull back just a bit, because there's also been the point that's come up that some have said this is the moment for the U.S. to lean in, for the U.S. to apply pressure on the Netanyahu government to try to get back to some kind of talks, which everyone agrees is the only chance for long-term peace in the region. Hussein, what's your take on that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely essential for the United States to put heavy pressure on Israel, as well as keep up pressure on Hamas and its supporters outside, including Iran and others, to kind of put the case that they're all harming themselves. So, when you fight counterinsurgencies, the difficulty of ending them is very great. And I think the Israelis are sort of stuck. Hamas, too, has brought terrible damage, not just to the people of Gaza, but to their own political standing. People are, especially in Gaza, they're angry with Hamas, and for good reason.
General Aish, I'll give you the final word here.
I must admit that I'm surprised here. Israel was attacked by Hamas in October 7th, and I won't describe all the atrocities that they have done. Hamas was joined by Hezbollah a day after, with no reason. And then the Iranians decided to join to that attack together with the Shia militia from Iraq and the Houthis from Yemen. And Israel should now show restraint. This is ridiculous. This is unbelievable.
You haven't killed 42,000 dead Palestinians is not enough?
What is really,
it's enough.
Let me finish for a second.
Go ahead.
I think what is really important is not the number of Hamas terrorists that were killed. What is really matter is to see the hostages back in Israel, and the threat conducted by Hamas from Gaza and by Hezbollah at the north eliminated, and the security restored. Bear in mind that till today, in the north and in the south, Israelis are not back to their villages. Why? Because of that threat. So at the end of the day, I think we will have first and foremost to eliminate the threat, and then we will be able to discuss all the security arrangements that will follow, that basically we have had them. We had ceasefire with the Hamas, and we had a ceasefire with the Hezbollah. They decided to surprise us. They decided to attack
General Aish, if I may.
They decided to conduct those atrocities.
General Aish, if I may, to Hussein's earlier point, this idea that Hamas will continue to fight, whether they're organized and supported or not, the question is this a missed opportunity for Netanyahu to begin to have some kind of long-term peace talks that haven't happened before?
The opportunity was given to Sinwar and his militants for that negotiation. And after 12 months, we have seen nothing from them. And
with
that's
Sinwar dead, does that change Netanyahu's calculation?
I think the fact that Netanyahu came out today with a very clear offer to allow a free pass to those who are going to release the hostages is a very good start. Now we have to wait and see who is the leader, if he is effective, because at the same time that we are talking about leadership, certain gangs are holding hostages inside the Gaza. It's a decentralized system today. It's not the system that we have seen in the past. So it's really a challenge. We will have to wait and see to what effect this offer is influencing the situation on the ground.
Gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. I thank you both for joining
Hamas
in
would
this
love
conversation.
To hear all that.
Retired Major General Yaakov Aish and Hussein Ibish.
You're welcome.
Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we start the day's other headlines in Brussels, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is making the case for his victory plan to European leaders and NATO officials. Zelensky urged an EU leaders summit to increase support for Ukraine's military and claimed Ukraine has intelligence that 10,000 troops from North Korea are coming to join Russia on the battlefield. Zelensky told reporters that Ukraine either needs NATO membership or nuclear weapons.
Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, and then this is defense for us, or we should have some kind of an alliance. Today, we do not know any effective alliances other than NATO. This is why we choose NATO, not nuclear weapons. We are choosing NATO.
After the EU meeting, Zelensky made his way across Brussels to a meeting of NATO defense ministers. It was the first such gathering under new NATO chief Mark Rutte, who said that Ukraine will indeed become a NATO member, but did not specify when that will be. The U.S. military says it carried out a series of strikes in Yemen targeting 5 underground bunkers used by Houthi rebels. It's the first time the U.S. has used long-range B-2 stealth bombers against the Iran-backed group. The strikes are an apparent warning to Iran, with Pentagon officials saying they demonstrate the abilities of the U.S. military to strike hard-to-reach targets.
We can strike targets of this nature anytime, anywhere from around the world. To my knowledge, this was not a repeat strike. Again, this was to go after very specific capabilities that the Houthis were storing deep underground.
The Iran-backed Houthi rebels have been attacking ships in the Red Sea for months in a show of solidarity with the Palestinian people over the war in Gaza. In Georgia, a grand jury has indicted a father and son for the mass shooting at Appalachia High School last month that killed 4 people. Colin Gray faces 29 counts, which include second-degree murder, manslaughter, and reckless conduct. His son, the 14-year-old accused shooter, faces 55 charges, including felony murder and malice murder. Their next court appearance is set for late November. It's the latest example of authorities trying to hold the parents of mass shooting suspects accountable for their children's alleged crimes. The Biden administration has now canceled student loans for 1 million public service workers. Officials crossed that milestone today with their latest $4.5 billion debt relief installment that was provided to 60,000 teachers, firefighters, nurses, and other public servants. All told, the administration has forgiven more than $175 billion for about 5 million borrowers. Those efforts come even as President Biden's broader student loan forgiveness plan faces legal challenges from some Republican-led states. Americans ramped up their shopping last month as low unemployment and steady pay gains offset worries about high prices. Retail sales jumped 0.4% in September when compared to the month before. That's a third straight monthly increase and signals ongoing consumer confidence heading into the vital holiday period. Separately, the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits fell unexpectedly last week by 19,000. Claims had spiked the week before due to the impact of recent hurricanes in the southeast. The economic data gave Wall Street a bit of a lift today, but not much. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose about 160 points to reach a new all-time high. The Nasdaq added about 6 points, so a tiny gain there. The S&P 500 slipped by a single point, so basically flat on the day. And Liam Payne's former One Direction bandmates say they're completely devastated by the singer's sudden death. The 4 issued a joint statement today saying, "Our thoughts are with his family, his friends, and the fans who loved him alongside us." An official autopsy confirmed Payne suffered multiple traumas after falling from his hotel balcony in Buenos Aires yesterday. The hotel had called 911 about a guest overwhelmed with drugs and alcohol. Payne saw massive fame in the 2010s as a member of the British boy band One Direction. They split in 2016, and Payne pursued a solo career. Overnight, loyal fans known as Directioners gathered to sing his music and to process their loss.
I started listening to One Direction when I was 11 years old. I was never able to see them live. They broke up. There was always talk about the return, the reunion, at least symbolically, but it won't be able to happen anymore.
In recent years, Payne spoke openly on social media about his struggles with fame and sobriety. He was 31 years old. And Mitzi Gaynor, the acting, singing, and dancing triple threat of Hollywood's golden age of musicals, has died.
I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair and send him on his way. Get the picture?
Her portrayal of Nellie Forbush in the 1958 film South Pacific earned a Golden Globe nomination. It was a highlight in a glittering career that spanned 8 decades across film, television, and stage. For years, she appeared in TV variety specials alongside stars like Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and Dean Martin. And at one point, she was the highest-paid female entertainer in Las Vegas. Mitzi Gaynor died of natural causes in Los Angeles. She was 93 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump continue their push for undecided voters. A bipartisan commission recommends the Secret Service seek new leadership outside of its ranks after multiple security failures. And we examine the presidential candidates' stark differences on climate change policy.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Early in-person voting started in the battleground state of North Carolina today. A reminder that Election Day is just around the corner. Both candidates are trying to broaden their appeal to different groups of voters in these crucial final days. We begin tonight in Wisconsin, where Vice President Harris's campaign schedule was briefly interrupted by news out of the Middle East. Lisa Desjardins has our coverage.
On the campaign trail, a moment of world significance.
Today, Israel confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead.
Vice President Harris spoke on the sidelines of a stop in Milwaukee today after Israel announced it had killed the head of Hamas.
This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
This comes on the heels of a contentious Fox News appearance last night.
5% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished.
The interview with host Brett Baier was heated from the start when Harris defended the Biden administration's record on immigration.
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House...
Later, Harris distanced herself from the president when asked what she would do differently in the White House.
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency.
She did not give specifics, saying that she represents a new generation. Her most passionate moment came in response to former President Trump's recent threats to turn the military against, quote, enemies within.
This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
For his part, Mr. Trump reached out to Latino voters in a Noticias Univision town hall last night near Miami. Audience members posed questions, including on immigration. Trump has recently said he wants to limit some legal immigration, but here he stressed it.
We have to have a lot of people come into our country. We just want them to come in legally through a system, because they've released hundreds of thousands of people that are murderers, drug dealers, terrorists. They're coming in totally, nobody knows who they are, where they come from.
I want to give you the opportunity to try to win back my vote.
Later, a voter said he was disturbed by Trump's inaction on January 6th. Trump defended his supporters.
But that was a day of love.
And his inaction.
They didn't come because of me, they came because of the election. They thought the election was a rigged election, and that's why they came. Some of those people went down to the Capitol. I said, peacefully and patriotically. Nothing done wrong at all, nothing done wrong.
This as we learned about scathing words about Trump from another GOP leader. According to an upcoming biography, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell privately called Trump stupid, as well as being ill-tempered and a despicable human being back in 2020, as the former president was trying to overturn the election. Publicly, McConnell endorsed Trump this year. In a statement today, he pointed out others, Lindsey Graham and J.D. Vance, have criticized Trump in the past too. But, quote, we are all on the same team now.
We're sure as hell not giving Kamala Harris a promotion to President of the United States.
Speaking of VP candidate J.D. Vance, he was back on the trail in battleground Pennsylvania today. Farther down the East Coast, Harris's running mate Tim Walz campaigned with former President Bill Clinton in North Carolina, where early voting started today. He also stopped at a campaign office turned collection site for supplies in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Nearly all planned voting sites are up and running just 3 weeks after the hurricane devastated parts of the state. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
Abortion access is a top issue this election season at both the state and federal levels. A number of states will have measures to protect reproductive rights on their ballots this November. And in key battlegrounds like Arizona and Nevada, these measures could have an impact on the presidential race. Our White House correspondent Laura Barron-Lopez spent time in both states recently and filed this report.
Fiona, I think he's going to love these flowers, huh? They're kind of fall colors.
Crystal Price comes to this cemetery in Mesa, Arizona almost once a month. It's where her son Noble is buried.
He's noble, he's great, and he's part of our family.
At Noble's grave, she and her family leave flowers, write messages, and take a moment of silence. Almost 6 years ago, Crystal had an abortion in her 22nd week of pregnancy when complications threatened her life.
I was coming in and out of consciousness, I lost so much blood, and it was a really scary, it was just really scary.
What was going through your mind when you heard the doctor say that you needed to terminate the pregnancy?
It was just excruciatingly hard to know that I was choosing to end the life of my son. But also knowing that it was the right choice for me and for my circumstances, that my life was important, my family needed me, and I wanted to live. I didn't want to associate my experience with my child with the word abortion, but that's what it was.
Arizona law only allows abortions for medical emergencies. After the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade in 2022, the state banned abortion after 15 weeks, with no exceptions for rape or incest. But this year, voters like Crystal will weigh in on Proposition 139, which would enshrine abortion rights in the state's constitution until fetal viability, generally considered to be around 24 weeks. Arizona is one of 10 states with measures protecting reproductive rights on the ballot this November. How do you plan on voting on that ballot measure?
I'll be supporting and voting yes on Proposition 139. Just reading the language, I became very emotional, and I was brought to tears as I considered the views that I've had in the past, where I thought abortion was completely wrong, and then having had personal experiences and realizing it's not so black and white.
In neighboring Nevada, abortion is currently allowed until 24 weeks under state law. But a yes vote for the ballot measure, Proposition 6, would protect it in the state's constitution.
Vice President Harris has made reproductive rights a key part of her campaign, and Democrats are hopeful that ballot measures protecting abortion access in Arizona and here in Nevada could boost turnout.
On the trail, Harris is drawing sharp contrast between herself and Republican rival Donald Trump when it comes to abortion access.
This is the same guy who said that women should be punished for having abortions.
The former president has offered a more conflicted message, taking credit for appointing 3 Supreme Court justices who voted to overturn the constitutional right to an abortion, but claiming that he'd veto a national 15-week abortion ban, then saying he'd allow states to restrict reproductive rights.
You will be protected, and I will be your protector. You will no longer be thinking about abortion.
Still, anti-abortion activists like Melissa Clement with Nevada Right to Life are confident that Donald Trump is the best conduit for their cause.
I don't think we have time to worry about whether or not it's a 15-week ban or anything like that. Even if he's pro-choice, which he may or may not be, he's not pro-abortion like Harris and Walz are. They're completely pro-abortion, and that's the only thing they care about. And when the choice is so stark, I've got to say that President Trump is the best choice for every pro-life voter, for every pro-choice voter, for every pro-woman voter.
For decades, Republicans have used abortion to motivate voters, helping lead to the fall of Roe.
People want to talk about protecting the right to abortion.
Now, as states take matters into their own hands, Clement sees ballot measures like Nevada's as a, quote, political move by Democrats to juice turnout.
Given the fact that we're up against tens of millions of dollars and, quite honestly, a media that is biased toward abortion, we have a high mountain to climb.
The fate of these two abortion measures in the Southwest battlegrounds could be determined by Latino voters, who make up 25% of eligible voters in Arizona and 22% in Nevada, the majority of whom are Mexican American. Canvassers like Liliana Trejo Venegas, who works with Reproductive Freedom for All, say engaging with people who come from the same background is helpful to make abortion care feel accessible. While canvassing in Las Vegas, Liliana often shares her own abortion story as a 19-year-old who wasn't ready to have a child.
They are able to humanize this often very taboo subject and see, I now know one of the 1 in 4 people who has had an abortion, and suddenly it's not so easy to vilify these folks for the decisions that they took.
For other Latinas, like Etelvina Zamora Escavel, a 60-year-old former casino worker who was born and raised in a Catholic household, supporting access to abortion is new.
It's probably the way that my mother always told us, your body is your temple.
Then, about 3 months ago, Etelvina began attending conversations held by Make the Road Nevada and abortion rights groups, meant to mobilize Latino voters. There, she heard women share their experiences with abortion.
How did you feel when you heard those stories?
To be honest, I start crying. If they are sick and the doctor tell them their life is in risk and they have to do it, that's what my mind changed, and I says, now I'm going to vote yes.
Still, abortion ballot measures may not be enough to convince Latinos to stick with Democrats, according to local strategist Vidiana Vidal.
I am not sure that will translate into a specific vote for Harris. Usually Latinos, they go to the vote with their pockets and their hearts, which means that they want to hear solutions about economy, jobs, if they can afford rent, if they can afford food at the table, and then they want to protect the health care of their loved ones. So abortion usually comes lower if you don't explain how is this related to healthcare.
He was able to get a name and a blessing right before he passed, and that was.
But back in Arizona, Crystal, who supported Donald Trump in 2020, is about to vote for a Democratic presidential candidate for the first time.
There are so many of us that are politically homeless, I guess, and there are just so many people who want to have dialogue and who want moderate policies. I want to be clear that I don't necessarily support all abortion. I feel like there are exceptions, though, that need to be available, especially for people like me who have unexpected complications in pregnancy.
Crystal's own experiences are motivating her to back Harris, and the country's post-Roe landscape could lead more voters like her to cross the aisle this November. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone Lopez in Arizona.
A bipartisan independent panel is calling for an overhaul of the Secret Service in a blistering new report out today. The panel was commissioned by President Biden after the July assassination attempt on former President Trump and was comprised of 4 former senior government officials, including former Homeland Security leaders Janet Napolitano and Frances Townsend. For more on the report's findings and the recommendations, we're joined by Carol Leonnig, investigative reporter at The Washington Post and the author of Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. Carol, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Carol, it's a pretty blunt assessment of the Secret Service failures that led to a gunman being able to take 8 shots at former President Trump at that Pennsylvania rally. In the report, they list an absence of critical thinking, a lack of ownership. Do the findings in this report line up with your reporting on that day?
I have to say I'm pretty proud of the Washington Post's reporting. My colleagues and I worked on a lot of stories in the hours after 6 p.m., roughly 6:11 p.m. on Saturday, July 13th, trying to understand what had gone so colossally wrong. And this report from this independent panel basically confirms all of our reporting in the days and hours immediately after the assassination attempt and shooting by Thomas Matthew Crooks. There was no real plan for preventing a person from being able to have a clear line of sight, in essence, a clear shot at Donald Trump from a building only 150 yards away. There were major problems in communications, no ability for the local police to directly tell the Secret Service in a clear and direct way and an instantaneous way that they were chasing a suspicious person and having reports of someone clambering onto a roof with a long gun. But it is really interesting what else the report and the investigation concluded. This larger pattern of complacency and a lack of critical thinking and a deeper examination of whether or not the service really tries to own its problems and fix them, and a real concern that they don't.
Among the recommendations is one that the next director of the Secret Service come from outside the agency. How big a shift would that be for the Secret Service?
It's something the Secret Service has resisted for decades. There have been 10 years ago, 9 years ago, when I ran a series, the Washington Post ran a series of stories, investigative pieces that I wrote about huge security breaches, not an assassination attempt, but near misses, and other efforts to kill President Obama. When we wrote those pieces, an independent panel commissioned by President Obama and a congressional investigative panel both urged outside leadership to shake up the Secret Service at that time. This is not a new recommendation, but there's a lot of more urgency for it because, former President Trump was almost killed. He came within, millimeters of being killed.
Carol, you've long reported on the lack of resources and funding that the Secret Service has been navigating. This one line from the report did stick out. They wrote, the failures of July 13th are not primarily tied to budgetary deficiencies at the service. Put otherwise, even an unlimited budget would not, by itself, remediate many of the failures of July 13th. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, they seem to be calling for a complete cultural overhaul. Is that possible?
It is going to require outside leadership, new eyes, fresh eyes on an agency that, let's be honest, has a ton of patriots in its fold, a group of people who are willing to give up their Christmas Eves, their wife's anniversary, their own birthdays, to be at the side of the president, the vice president, or the presidential candidate and secure that person's life. People that are willing to take a bullet. But it's also an agency that has become more interested in covering up problems than in identifying them and fixing them. A culture that doesn't like to let anybody inside for fear that somebody will discover, how much of a sort of hall of mirrors and smoke it is. There is a lot of duct tape holding the Secret Service together and a lot of heart on the part of these patriots. And it's going to require somebody coming in fresh and saying, we need to start over about what we value here at this agency. We don't just value you being tough and giving every hour you possibly have and sweating through all your clothes and standing in the ice for hours. We don't just want that. We also want this other piece, which is a willingness to learn, to use technology, and to call out problems, to call them out loud.
As investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Carol Leonnig, joining us tonight. Carol, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over the past few weeks, we've seen a series of punishing hurricanes once again illustrate the consequences of climate change. Climate policy is one of the many issues we're covering in our Promises and Policy segments in the run-up to Election Day. The divide between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris on climate change is as stark as any issue the country is facing. William Brangham has been covering this closely, and I spoke with him about it earlier this week. William, it's great to see you. So as Vice President, Kamala Harris helped pass the largest government investment in clean energy and climate initiatives. On the trail, she often talks about climate change as a pocketbook issue, like the soaring insurance costs that many homeowners face due to extreme weather. Help us understand her approach.
I think on one level, she sees the polls that says the economy is the most important thing, hence that focus. Secondarily, I think on the issue of climate change and why she doesn't drill into it that much is that I think her campaign believes that if you're a climate change voter and that really matters to you, you're already in her camp because of the things you mentioned. Historic legislation, first of its kind in American history, and her opponent has said climate change is a hoax and we don't have to really deal with that. So as you mentioned, she does talk about it, but for instance, in her DNC speech, climate change was one clause in one sentence and that was it. She often talks about it, as you say, as an economic issue. She has said it's a crisis. She has said it is urgent that we deal with it. But let's take a listen to how she couches this issue.
We have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels.
So she's merging clean energy and fossil fuels there into one answer. You mentioned Donald Trump, who has famously said that climate change is a hoax. How is he approaching this on the campaign trail?
Trump talks about climate change almost always as a means to attack Democrats for the policies they've enacted to address it. And so he says those things drive up costs for consumers at the gas pump. He says they hurt the economy. He calls them lunacy. I mean, these are things like EV, electric vehicle mandates, or promotions of wind or solar or battery manufacturing. Here's how he often talks about the issue.
When people talk about global warming, I say the ocean is going to go down 1/100th of an inch within the next 400 years. That's not our problem. Our problem is nuclear warming.
Trump regularly dismisses the threat from sea level rise. I mean, he nonsensically says it will just create more oceanfront property. He says this is really a non-existent threat. So I just wanted to fact check this one issue. The latest U.S. National Climate Assessment on just the issue of sea level rise. I want to read you a little bit about what it says. It says, quote, sea level rise threatens permanent inundation of infrastructure, including roadways, railways, ports, tunnels, and bridges, water treatment facilities and power plants, and hospitals, schools, and military bases. That is trillions of dollars at risk from just one byproduct of a warming world. And as for this issue of nuclear winter, I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about. There is no such thing as nuclear warming. That does not happen. If he's talking about nuclear war, yes, that would have an enormous impact on the climate, but it would actually be likely a cooling effect because of the projected nuclear winter.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Exactly. So Trump does say climate change is an issue, but only because Democrats are obsessing over it.
So what would a potential Harris administration do as it relates to climate change?
Harris has not really laid out concrete policy. As you mentioned, she is coming off an administration that passed the most historic attempts to address climate change in American history, and she seems to imply there will be more of the same. But as you noted, Jeff, she keeps promoting all of the U.S. government's attempts to boost energy production, green energy, at the same time that she brags about America's oil and gas production. And there is an inherent tension there. The way we address climate change is to bring our emissions down, and the U.S. increasingly becoming the world's gas station is not the way to do that. And Harris, likely because she doesn't want to be seen as attacking domestic energy production, doesn't really reckon with this. She doesn't really reconcile how those two competing motives will be reconciled in her administration.
And what about Donald Trump? If he's saying climate change doesn't exist, it doesn't pose a threat, I mean, what is he proposing to do about it, if anything?
Trump says on energy policy that he's going to bring energy prices in half, cut them in half. It's very difficult to do that. Global energy prices are set on the global market. He has repeatedly said he is up for more and more oil and gas drilling, the famous drill, baby, drill, although the U.S., as we mentioned, is already pumping out record amounts of oil and gas. Trump does not believe that addressing greenhouse gas emissions is an issue. He has said he will roll back environmental rules on the oil and gas industry. This is why he said to oil and gas executives, you ought to give me $1 billion for my campaign because I'm going to help you guys out. The Project 2025, the famous Heritage Foundation project, which Trump has said, I'm not a part of, that's not me, even though it was written largely by people from his administration. They have laid out a very detailed energy and climate plan, and it is basically to abolish all climate-related actions by the federal government. It will roll back the incentives within the Inflation Reduction Act. How much of that Trump could do if he was elected is unclear. He would need Congress and the Senate to do that. And interestingly, in the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of money has been seeded into Republican districts and to Republican states. And a lot of those local leaders love federal funding for a new battery manufacturing plant and all the jobs that comes. And they don't want to see those things go away. So it's unclear how far a Trump administration could really go. The promise he has made, though, is a whole-scale reversal of any action by the federal government to deal with the climate crisis.
William Brangham, thanks so much for walking us through this. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, as climate change continues to stir debate in the election, we take a look at the on-the-ground reality for those dealing with its consequences. Sarah Jacober is a U.S. Forest Service wildland firefighter who serves on the Grand Ronde Rappel crew based in La Grande, Oregon. In her brief but spectacular take, she offers a window into a day on the job as climate change lengthens wildfire seasons and intensifies their impact.
People think of a stereotypical firefighter as someone working for a city department, driving in a red truck, paramedic type folks, and that is not what we do. We fight fire in the natural landscape. I work on a rappel crew, which means that I staff a helicopter. We arrive at the fire, we size it up, and then we rappel out and ideally put the fire out. I remember the first time I rappelled out of the helicopter. I don't remember consciously feeling fear. There's a very analytical process behind everything, and it cuts the fear out or works around things in a more logical way. When I was 18, I took a job fighting wildland fire to help pay for college. By the time I graduated undergrad, I had done 4 or 5 years of firefighting, and I had really enjoyed it. And I could do what I wanted in the winter and always return to work in the summer. It's physically and emotionally adventurous. You're working in these complex and risky environments with a small team of people, and so it's all about enduring things together. I am one of 3 women on my module. I predominantly work with men. Peak fire season for us in the Pacific Northwest is generally July, August, September. Fires that I'm responding to are becoming harder to control. They're getting bigger, faster. From my perspective as a firefighter, the link between climate change and the fires that I'm fighting is pretty common knowledge. Anyone with a smartphone can figure this out. My biggest concern is what we may encounter in the future. I don't know if we know what that is, and I don't know if we know how that is going to tax us as firefighters. Are we today able to go out and do our jobs, and how's that going to look for us? We'll respond to fires that will get big quickly. We'll see fire behavior shift from a relatively benign and active fire to all of a sudden it's running and we're no longer able to physically do anything with our hands. We're just having to adopt different strategies quickly. I'll probably stay in this job longer than I'm willing to admit. I do wonder about having a family later. I don't know how I would make that work with this job. My favorite part of the job is just being in the woods, we're putting the fire out, and we're just getting the work done. Normally, when we're out there doing our jobs, nobody even knows that we're there. My name is Sarah Jacober, and this is my brief but spectacular take on being a wildland firefighter.
And as always, you can see more of our brief but spectacular videos at pbs.org/newshour/brief. And join us again here tomorrow night when we report from on the ground in North Carolina, where residents are still reeling from Hurricane Helene's floodwaters that inundated the state. In the meantime, that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.